I've mentioned many times, actually, my disdain of the A-plot, B-plot thing. But most of that is because it tends to be ill-used. When you have two plots that have nothing to do with each other, and there's not really any purpose in them being there, episodes of the week kind of a thing. In fact, I think I just talked about that in Grey 17 is Missing. Here, though, we have two plots that are pretty much unconnected to each other. The only major connection between the two is the very vague thematic significance of sometimes it hurts to go forward. And I do like that thematic connection. I do think that is a deliberate connection between the two. But that's not why I'm okay with them. See, I've said for years that television is a sort of medium that is ill-used for what it's actually really good at. And that's telling long-term stories with gradual growth and shift between characters and plots. And while that has been done in television, I feel like it's more rare, probably because of the realities of making a television show, which I've talked about many times, both on Voyager and here on B5. So in this case, I'm okay with the A-plot, B-plot, because this is actually all establishment. Nothing of any true significance happens in this episode that is mandatory for the future. Not really. And yet, it is fully setting up the build-up to how things are going to go in the future. This is actually a fairly classic 1-2 punch from a writer's perspective. It's the kind of thing I like to pull as a GM all the time, for example. You finish off certain plots, do so successfully. We have two plots in this: the fight against the shadows and the unification of the non-aligned worlds, and Franklin's situation, and both are resolved effectively in this episode. Both of them have a fairly positive outcome. We have another win for the good guys, right? Thing is, having done so, you then reveal that this win is basically winning a battle, not a war. In other words, that we weren't even fully aware of the full scope and scale of things yet. And then at the end of the win, you reveal the full scope and scale of things. And then there's that moment of dread. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. I want to talk about the two plots separately. I'm going to talk about the Franklin plot first, even though I actually find it to be the more interesting in this case. Excuse me. I'm still recovering from something. Ugh. Garibaldi, of course, feels guilty about the whole Franklin situation. I mean, why wouldn't he? He was Franklin's friend, and he wanted to help. He's, of course, been there before. He knows what it's like to be recovering from something like this. And a little bit more to the point, Garibaldi knows what it's like to try to find yourself. He's been through that before. He understands that before. He has, of course, by now, basically found himself, but his guilt about not following through on it is interesting and actually quite valid when you think about it. I also love his comment. Sometimes people run away to get away from you. Sometimes they run away to see if you're going to follow them. And that is absolutely 100% true. Hell, I've done that before. I try not to do that anymore, but, we've all done that to some extent or another, haven't we? And how do you tell which one's which? How can you decide when they want you to follow them or when they want you not to? I actually find myself thinking that Franklin did actually want Garibaldi to follow him to some extent or another, but I digress. Then there's the lady talking. It's a great scene. It's just like a little bit of a reminder. I've talked before about how difficult it is from a writing perspective to remind an audience of what's happening over here in the background. I've talked about this several times in the last few episodes. And JMS has basically resorted to the cheapest available option. I don't mean cheap as in cost, I mean cheap as in it's easy, which is just flashbacks. Hey, you remember this? Oh yeah. He actually does that in this episode, actually. But the lady who's going through down below and the interaction with Franklin is a great way to remind us of just how bad things actually are back on Earth. Because we have in her something we actually haven't had yet with regards to the Clark administration. A normal perspective. I mean, we've kind of seen shades of this with regards to the Night Watch, but in her we have a completely ordinary person, not a part of the military, not a part of the police force, not a part of anything, who is afraid, even on an alien space station, well, a space station that is not loyal to Earthdom, to even speak dissent, to even mention things that are forbidden back home. Paints a rather chilling picture, actually, and I really like the added touch it adds. The So there's the stabbing. I don't actually know if this is true or not. JMS spoke several times about the possibility of the stabbing and some of the related stuff to be censored when it comes to the UK broadcast, because it's a pretty graphic scene, at least for back when this episode came out. Nowadays, Game of Thrones looks at that and like, what? That's it? What'd you do, tickle the man? But it is actually worth noting that despite the fact that they don't show gore, it is very brutal. And this is something I actually spoken about a lot personally, and I don't want to get up on my high horse and talk about this again. So all I'm going to say is that a talented director with some talented actors can pull out the brutality and horribleness of a violent situation without actually showing it, without showing the violence, without showing the gore, without having to resort to seeing giblets of turkey bits and chicken bits flying all over the place. You don't actually have to do that. I'm not saying it's necessarily always good, and I'm not saying it's necessarily always bad, but I wanted to give credit where credit is due, because I actually flinched during the stabbing scene. It was very well shot. I mean, they even they do this double take where you see from the perspective of over the shoulder the knife, then it cuts to effectively Franklin's viewpoint, not literally, but like basically Franklin's shoulder, showing the knife, and then there is this really big wind-up, and bam, right in there. And the way that the actor who plays Franklin just... it showcases just how horrible that kind of a thing is. And as they mentioned later, yeah, that knife went pretty far in. That's pretty horrible. Then the guy shows up and says, I can't help you, I'm sorry. I'm a criminal too. It's interesting because if you think about it, that mindset is connected to something that's happening in the other plot. But I don't want to cover that just now. Just keep that in the back of your mind. I'd like to think personally that Franklin, being a very good, very well-trained doctor, knew enough to try and staunch the bleeding as best as he could with his clothes or whatever. Because with that kind of a wound, you're likely to bleed out inside of minutes. I mean, like, less than an hour at the absolute outside. We're talking probably closer to, say, 5 or so minutes, I'd say, right off the top of my head. Because it hit him in the gut, it looks like. Now, if he was to hit, like, the neck or something, yeah, maybe 2 minutes on the outside. But I'd like to think that he staunched the wound and then started hallucinating because, you know. That being said, I want to point one thing out. I just feel like pointing this out because I didn't even realize it until I was going back through this episode. I have always assumed... always, that Franklin just starts hallucinating. Thing is, whoops, I'm sorry, I completely forgot to mute you. Be gone. As much as it is exceptionally likely that he was hallucinating and that was just his own inner thoughts talking, and that is a totally valid perspective, it is worth noting JMS never says that outright. At no point in time is it stated definitively what's happening there. And that's actually, and I mention this because that is very keeping with JMS's style. He doesn't like to say, "Prong, this is the end." He likes to lay out the situation and allow you to interpret it as you will. He's actually done this with regards to souls, for example. The mere existence of something like souls is actually debatable within Babylon 5. There is some evidence for and some evidence against, and it's up to you to decide that. And I like that. And I like the fact that we can decide for ourselves what exactly Franklin's talking to. And who exactly the other Franklin is. But I do want to point out one thing. I actually really like how the Franklin who's talking to himself, is in an Army of Light uniform. Whether it's him, or some aspect of his soul, or some angelic creature, or whatever it is you want to interpret that as, I think that's very fitting. Because Franklin, ultimately, is the kind of person who is a doer. He may have this whole runaway problem, as he himself mentions, and as I've kind of hinted at as we've been going throughout the series, but he is definitely a person of action, and the idea of not signing up. I mean, you remember back when they first formed the conspiracy against the Clark administration? You remember how quickly and without hesitation he signed up? Yep, I'm in. Of course he'd put on the Army of Light uniform. I just thought that was a nice touch. I like something that I've actually hinted at in the last couple of episodes, last 3 or 4 at this point. I've actually kind of lost track. It's been a few days. Last few episodes with regards to Franklin and the stim addiction thing. Because, see, I always kind of naturally assumed, when I first watched this, that his wanting to go on walkabout was to get over the stims. Thing is, he himself doesn't say that, and if you're paying attention, it's not about that at all. There are plenty of ways to get over stims. As much as it may take a while to go through the withdrawal thing, that's a few weeks and or months, and then you're done in the end. There's no need to go on a walkabout for that. And the whole thing about finding yourself, he himself pretty much admits it's kind of a crazy, silly thing that he doesn't actually believe in. And more than one other person actually calls him out on that. I love this because I've been mentioning these things on purpose to you to try to lead to this point without spoiling. I wanted to bring it to your attention how the episodes have been leading up to the fact that that's all bullcrap. He doesn't need to go walkabout for the stims, and he doesn't need to go walkabout to find himself. Neither of those things are actually what he's doing. I didn't want to say it outright because I didn't want to bring down the spoiler box, but as he says it flat out in this episode, he was just trying to get away. He was just trying to run away from the responsibility because... and this is going to sound weird, but I fully empathize with him on this. See, here's the thing. Sometimes it hurts to move forward. Sometimes going forward, progressing, accomplishing, doing, hurts. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's physically difficult. Sometimes emotionally. Sometimes mentally. Sometimes it's taxing. If you believe in such things, sometimes it stains your soul to move forward, whether literally or metaphorically. It hurts to move forward sometimes. And that is actually Franklin's character arc to date in a nutshell. He doesn't want to hurt. He doesn't want to go through that pain. He doesn't want to go through that hardship. He wants to just say, nope. The moment it gets to the point where he has to make those kind of hard decisions, he walks away. I've actually hinted at this before, and I hope you guys have been paying attention. Probably the first example that comes to my mind right now is when he was running the down below illegal medical area, and I talked about the problems of medical supplies and whatnot. I didn't really say it outright then, at least I don't remember doing so, but one of the points I was trying to make in the background was that what Franklin was doing was a very short-sighted thing. He wasn't looking at the long picture. He wasn't realizing the reality of the situation. He wasn't understanding the complexity of what he was doing. It was possible for him to do what he was doing, but he refused to make a hard choice in the matter. He was basically doing another form of running away. Well, I could own up and try to figure out a proper way to make this happen, or I could just say, screw it, steal supplies and help people. Never mind the cost. Never mind the consequence. Because that is, in a nutshell, what the easy road really means in real life and in fiction. It means avoiding consequence. Now, that's not to say that consequence always comes with the hard road, and that's not to say that, there's always... That's not to say it's 100%. But when you talk about taking the easy path or the difficult path, what you're talking about is how you're going to deal with the consequences or not deal with the consequences. And that is exactly what Franklin's been doing this whole time. So he finally meets himself, and he himself, whatever or whoever it is, calls him out on it. What a load of crap. I loved that. I was like, yes! He literally calls himself out on it. And I love the fact that the big stirring thing that allows Franklin, the real Franklin, to get back up is, I want to do it all again. The reason I find that interesting is because it's not quite the typical cliche, I want to live, which is what I was actually expecting, or, I want to do better, or anything like that. No, I want to do it all again. What that means is that he is, for the first time, acknowledging that it was worth it. Acknowledging that all of the things he had value to him, were significant to him, and that he is now willing to deal with consequence and take the hard path in order to go ahead and have those positive things. Net positive, you see? And I like that. He also has two more things he says here which I like. He says how he spent most of his life focusing on what he wasn't, not what he was. I think a lot of us can equate to that mentality, including me right now. I freely admit I tend to focus way more on what I am not and what I cannot do than what I am and what I can do. I'll give you a very stupid example. Recently, a few months ago actually at this point, my little niece had a little bit of an infection. Just simple. She bit her tongue. Very simple. It's a minor thing, but it caused her swelling and it caused her pain. And you know what I could not help but fixate on was the fact that I couldn't heal that. I couldn't cast Cure 2 or whatever. I couldn't take that pain away from her. I couldn't restore that swelling from her. All I could do was take care of her the best that I was able to. You know, first aid and health and proper nutrition. I know how to take care of people. I'm actually pretty good at that. But I couldn't actually just the problem away. You know? And that's all I could fixate on. It actually took her mother, my sister, calling me out on that and basically pointing out that I was taking damn good care of my niece that day and trying to make sure that she was safe, that she didn't overheat, that she had plenty of liquids, that she had plenty of food, that she had the right kind of food, that she could eat properly, that she was taking her medicine when she needed it, how she needed it, and basically being a huge source of comfort and moral support for her, which helped her to get better and heal. Even right now, I have trouble acknowledging that, because it's so much my nature to focus on what I cannot do rather than what I can. Anyone else out there of the similar mindset? I also cannot help but point out that Franklin's last comment there is very Vorlon. What are you? Alive. So let's shift over to the other plot. For those of you not aware, Anna is actually mentioned in the guest credits right at the frickin' beginning. Now, they kind of... There was an issue about this, and I mean, I noticed it immediately, my second time watching the episode, and of course this time it was blaringly obvious, but I also read the JMS Speaks thing about it in the Lurker's Guide, and he talks about how they basically had no choice, and he's right. I was actually going to bring up this exact comment. Theoretically, JMS has confirmed what I was theorizing, because of SAG rules, because of the nature of how the guild works, and the fact that you have to do credits for this and that, and blah, blah, blah. They had no choice. They had to give her credits at the beginning, at a certain time. And so they had to showcase her there, period. So the best they could do was just show Anna instead of Anna Sheridan and hope that we just didn't figure it out and it's just in the back of our mind. I actually usually refer to that as the Scooby-Doo mystery. I know that's a weird one, but Scooby-Doo's mystery does tended to follow a very static pattern. Introduced and then forgotten is what it is. It's like, oh, hey, here I am, and then gone. And then later on, it was this guy all along. You know, that kind of a thing. So that's kind of what they did with Anna here. Yep, there's Anna. Okay, she's gone. And then they never mention her again until the very last scene of the episode. The politics, the realities. I've got a lot to talk about in the A plot here. Actually, I probably don't. I've talked about this concept before. It is easy from a tactical perspective, from someone... How many of you out there have played 4X games, or turn-based strategy games, or real-time strategy games? Any kind of war games of any sort, whether it's on a board, or tabletop, or video game format. I bet a lot of you have. It is so easy to look down at the board and say, well, I've got 12, and they've got 8, and while they have superior weapons, I have superior positioning, I can win this fight. And go! What is not easy is to be one of those 12, looking at those 8 who have those superior weapons and say, oh God, I'm going to die. See, I've mentioned this topic many times before, and I've come up with a quote for it. I don't have a term for it, a lorism yet, but I do have a quote for it. Why should I help you help us when it weakens me? Now that sounds like a very selfish perspective, but if you really think about it, it is very easy to understand. Yes, from a more, distant kind of perspective, again, if we end up fighting in this fight, we will probably win, and that will probably help us, including my people. But it won't help me. I'll be dead, or at least I have a high chance of being dead. It's like when you have this massive army charging on an enemy force. Those guys in front are screwed. The guys in back, yeah, sure, but the guys in front are screwed. And we've seen this many times. Actually, Lord of the Rings, a film series I'm going to be going through very quickly here, which I think actually by the time you're watching this I've already started, is a great example of the guys in front are screwed, because that's just how that is. It is difficult to ask someone to give up themselves for the sake of us, even if us includes them and theirs. And that also leads to the necessity of ordering people to their death, just to hammer the point in. Sheridan basically orders Ivanova and Marcus to their death. If we're being 100% honest, if not for the fact that they were main characters, they probably should have died. Not that I want them to, And not that it would actually make a good of... It wouldn't fit narratively right here. One episode before the end of Season 3 is not the time to kill two main characters. Not like that. But if we were to just look at it from an in-universe perspective, yeah, they should have died right there. They should have been one of the casualties of that battle. And, of course, this ties back into that thing where they had to do that attack, where they needed to get the intel on if their new weapon worked against the Shadows. You need some of these things when it comes to war, when it comes to the grand strategy layer of things. I also find it interesting that Marcus probably really hits the nail on the head with regards to how screwed they are, better than anyone else. Sheridan just flat out says you're screwed. Marcus is, of course, effectively a soldier, Batman, but, you know. And Ivanova is a career military, so both of them understand what they're being asked to do. So Sheridan doesn't waste any big speeches. He just says, look, I'm ordering you on a necessary, probably suicidal mission, and they understand that. But I like that Marcus nails it home for us, the viewers, just in case we don't get it, because he is willing to be so much more open and blatant and flagrant with Ivanova than he normally is. He actually flat out tells her how beautiful she thinks she is in a language she can't understand, and then stumbles over explaining what he said, and then tries to stay and to keep her company. That is more overt than he has ever been. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he has never actually broached the subject with her until this moment. And he probably wouldn't have if not for the fact that he thought they were going to die. So then there's the sleep tradition. I'm going to talk about this here because it's brought up here, even though it kind of concludes the episode as well. It's an interesting tradition, very Minbari. I like the idea of... It's a very Minbari thing, the idea of cutting away the masks in order to reveal the truth, your true self. I don't fully agree with that, because, sleep is not exactly the best way to get across your true self. I used to actually have sleepwalking problems myself, and I don't think when I was sleepwalking, and I mean literally, like getting up out of bed, doing activities while asleep, waking up, having knocked over my closet trying to figure out what the heck I was doing. I'm not kidding. I've woken up in some weird places before, back when I was working 100+ hours a week. But, so yeah, I'm not sure I agree that that's when I was my true self, when I was... But it is a very Minbari thing, because the Minbari believe in the tactile reality of the metaphorical metaphysical. They want to find a way to cut down to matters. They literally have a device to scan your soul. I mean, that's the best way I can explain Minbari mentality in a nutshell. So, and whether it works or not is up to you, of course, to debate, like I mentioned earlier. But the point is, they look at this and they say, well, we have to find a way, especially in a coupling, to remove the masks. They have to get rid of the masks somehow. So how do we do it? Well, when are you least defensive? Oh, when you're sleeping, of course, duh! And therefore, the upbringing of this tradition. It also brings to mind the reality of truth. One of the things I've said many times when it comes to writing a fictional setting, not a book or a work, but a setting, is that you have to define if certain things are. For example, is there a concept such as truth in your setting? Now that may sound like a weird thing, but keep in mind, truth here in reality is so permeated by perspective that we don't actually know if there is such a thing as real truth in real life. That is still a matter of debate. If there is something that is true regardless of all other layers of existence, of perception, of, the observer affects the observed, of all other aspects of that thing, we don't know if there is such a thing as true truth. It has not been proven because, by definition, it can't be. But you as a writer need to decide if things like that exist in your setting. I mentioned the earlier concept of souls. In fact, I've brought that up twice now. You have to decide, does such a thing exist within your fictional setting? All of this stuff has to be laid down. And I bring that up, especially with regards to the next episode, but why don't we save a little bit more of that for later? So they enter the TACCOM Center, and I really like it. It's great having basically this large holodeck thing where you can see the battle and all that stuff. It actually makes a large amount of sense, too, if you actually think about it. Rather than, it's basically the equivalent of the grid that most actual commanders see when they're in a battle room or a TACCOM room or whatever. It's just, it's being presented fully three-dimensionally as a holographic image, because each of the ships involved is probably doing like passive sensor scans around them to give you an idea of what they're looking at. And all of that is then feeded into the central computer, which gives one cohesive picture rather than the bits and pieces each ship is gathering. It actually makes a lot of sense. It also would be interesting. I'm sure the budget can never afford this, but I personally like to think of the fact that, say, when a large cruiser is taken out, there's suddenly like a gap over here in the vision because the ship that was scanning that area and responsible for that section of the battle is no longer there. I also like how there's 3 lights. There are 3 lights! Sorry. Because that's just very Minbari. It is such a Minbari thing to have everything in threes. Threes. And so it just makes sense to me that there would be 3 lights there rather than 2. So the shadow ambush and the tactics they employ have been called into question several times, but the intention is very clear and apparent. They have been gathering people into this area for some time, and then they jump in fairly far out of the system, because what they want to do is this. What they do not want to do is this, and then have to do the exact opposite. That's incredibly inefficient, and they would spend so much time hunting down each and every single ship, especially if the ships ran in different directions. Oh god, that would take forever. So much easier to continue the process of hurting them, as they've been doing on a sector level, even when they're down in normal space. It is also brutal and horrible to think of the kind of culling they're trying to accomplish here. But I do have to wonder if this was an attempt to uncover the other hand. See, just hold on to that for just a second. I want to comment on a couple other things really quick. First of all, note the shadows again retreat. This is still showing that my comments about them are true, that the shadows do not want to take losses, that each shadow ship is precious to them. And even though they brought in a big fleet, lots of destroyers, lots of fighters, and lots of the new ships, which I don't actually know what to call those, the scout vessel things, when it became apparent they were losing this battle, they bolted, because each of those ships is valuable to them. But then we get to the vision. We get the win, and then Franklin's back, yay! And then we get to this vision that Kosh gave Sheridan. And of course, he shows it us in flashback in case we forgot. Most of it is laid bare, and the realities of what has already happened is already just... But there's one thing that's left untouched in that vision, and that's the hand. Because there are 2 hands, right? I'm not going to bring down a spoiler box for this, because it's going to be discussed literally the next episode. But we already know for a fact, as of now, that the Shadows employ let's just call them an elite. That's the term I usually use when I'm GMing for players. If they want like an NPC who has stats and skills and a personality and is just better than other subservient NPCs, that's called an elite. So, the Shadows have been employing an elite for some time. His name is Mr. Morden. He's been around since frickin' forever. Right? So who do you think the Vorlons have been employing as their hand, as they call it? Sheridan on one hand, Morden on the other. And it's so apparent there. And the director apparently chose some creative decisions with regards to the camera work that JMS actually disagreed with, to make it more apparent that the people were like, oh my god, it's that person, when Anna was walking through the crowds. Because it's a form of directive misdirection, and actually it's kind of a creative cheat. And I kind of agree with JMS on that. He shouldn't have done that. Because the whole point is building up to, oh my god, the hand, now that the Shadows know where we are, the Shadows know where I'm here, and they know where the other hand is, and they're sending the other hand here, and it's Anna. Because the intention, at least by my perspective, and I've asked 3 of my other friends about this before doing this video, and they all agreed with me. Everyone believed, all 4 of us I should say, believed that was Morden, that the camera angle was from Mr. Morden, and that Mr. Morden was coming for Sheridan, because that's what it was built up to be. And then, oh my god, it's Anna. Twist! And then, of course, the flash forward that Delenn has is laid bare. Season ender next time, guys. I think it's about time we finally go back to Zahadum. for better or for worse. See you next time.